think to begin the conversation, to link this discussion to the noosphere, I think maybe the most appropriate question for both of you philosophers is that what do you think the role of philosophers can be in the noosphere? And if noosphere to you guys feel limited for these big ideas that you have? Maybe, Lorenzo, you can start.
Thank you, and thank you, Shima, for the excellent organization of these amazing 2 days. I only have one complaint, if I may say so.
I'm used to complaints, by the way.
Sitting on such a comfortable lounge chair straight after lunch is extremely dangerous. So that is why you will see me sitting at the edge of the chair, because I want to avoid having too much comfort after the fantastic lunch that we were treated to. But to your question, maybe to connect a couple of concepts that have emerged in the last day and a half, I think this conference is coming at a very interesting historical juncture, and the title somehow gives it away, because on the one side, the concept of the noosphere appears more meaningful to more people than ever for the obvious coming together of humanity, both on a positive side, the development of technologies that bring us together, the development of planetary sapience that allows us to be in dialogue, actually, with the planet and to extend the noosphere beyond just the human, and also through a negative coming together of humanity, the planetary challenges that we face as a species, and in fact as multiple species inhabiting a finite Earth. So on the one hand, there is a certain historical push towards ideas such as that of the noosphere. At the same time, if you look at the human world, the trend seems to be the opposite. These are times of geopolitical fragmentation. It is not a coincidence that you've added Global South there in the title, as Boris yesterday was insightfully reminding us. There has been a transformation of the teleology of development of first, second, and third world, and now the appearance of the Global South as a signifier. So I'm trying to make sense of these contradictory trends, once towards unity and once towards fragmentation. And it seems to me that we are at the end of a very significant historical cycle. And to put it very simply, we're witnessing the end of 3 centuries of Western control over the becoming of the planet. These are quite spectacular and eccentric centuries that we're coming from, where the becoming of the Earth in its totality, the history of its peoples, the history of its climate, was defined in a very narrow and culturally homogeneous peninsula of Asia called Europe, and then its American colony for a shorter period of time. And witnessing the end of this phase, all that goes under the name of multipolarity, the emergence of the Global South, post-coloniality, so on and so forth, I think, and I conclude with this, really provide a task for thinkers and philosophers and intellectuals and writers and artists today, which is to recompose a language of commonality, a language of unity, perhaps even a language of universality, in a world where we can no longer, and thankfully so, take for granted the conceptual apparatus, the vocabulary, the terminology that we have inherited from ultimately Greek philosophy, and that has inhabited the Western mind and hence the world mind for the last 3 centuries. So how to reconceptualize the noosphere with an unknown that is not just a Western mind, I think, is a great and extraordinarily exciting challenge for our time today.
Thank you very much for what you shared. So basically, for you, if I can wrap up in a couple of words, is that the fragmentation that can be addressed within the concept of noosphere, and at the same time bringing this universality and bringing different visions of noosphere, not just the Western, basically, conceptualization. And we get back to that universality and how we can build universal utopias as we move in this dialogue.
Just to underline what you said, Shima, because you're perfectly right. I'm a little bit Hegelian about this. I think that the fragmentation of the world that we're experiencing today is a necessary passage to a higher level unity that can bring us closer to some of the conversations that we have had on the noosphere.
There is a French philosopher that has died for some time now. There is Cornelius Castoriadis. I don't know if some of you have heard about Cornelius Castoriadis. And he distinguished instituted, yes, I can say that, society, and institutionalized society or something like that, or and instituent society. And I think the best politics, the best time when we have a politics that works, it's where we are not, those two dimensions are not disconnected. They actually feed each other. But I think now there is a huge dissonance in our society. It's almost like, you know, a split between institutionalized society and instituent society. Because instituent society is actually what I would call the collective desire to be, like the very dynamic of what we desire. And we see, if we look at sociological, anthropological survey all over the world, people are talking about ecology. They are talking also about, they want to be enrooted in the region or a local point of view, like the fragmentation you were talking about. And at the same time, they are preoccupied with unity, what is the fate of the earth, etc., etc. And in fact, real politics, like the desire to be together, the togetherness, is that. But you have the institutionalized society. And the institutionalized society right now, it is the nation state. That was instituted by the Europe at first, and after that was then constructed, becoming more and more subtle. And I think the real problem we have politically now, it is the nation state. When we are talking about politics, we are talking about the nation state. And everybody has to follow, because there is what we call the Hegelian, you know, nation state with the army, with justice, and with all that. The power, the institutionalized power, is still belongs to the nation state, but the desire to live collectively is not the nation state anymore. So it's like this dissonance that we are actually living, and that is, in my opinion, one of the main sources of the wars we have, of what I called this conflict between territorialized identities and territory-less identities all over the world. And just, I think we have to overcome that. And because to answer precisely your question, you say, what is the function, like the old question of an intellectual, of a philosopher or something, is to try to make people being aware of that, of this disconnection.
So you think basically the time that we live in it can be also the revival of active philosophies, of really bringing philosophical ideas into the noosphere?
But I think, you know, people, they like regions, they want to be enrooted in the local, and even to eat, they say to eat local, in the same time to think global, and the nation state doesn't do that. It's becoming a political parasite in the middle. So when we think about politics, first we have to expand our thought, expand our definition of what is, our very definition of what is politics. In fact, I mean, the nation state is what? I don't know exactly, but like 200 years or something?
Do you
it's
think,
not much.
What is nation state?
There were cities before, there was so many things, empires, they're different. So we have to invent something else. Give you an example. But it's just fiction when I'm talking. Just think about Switzerland. It's interesting because in Switzerland, you have people that speak different languages. You know, they are very much into little regions involving, and in the same times, they have a common interest to live together beyond the difference of languages. Some people in Switzerland, when they are in the Italian Switzerland, they don't speak French or German, and the other, but they still are Swiss. So I think we could think of kind of a system like that. That couldn't be the United Nations. That couldn't be that, because the United Nations is basically it's just the governments, the representatives of the different governments that are there, and they are even how can I say, all the conflicts that exist on the international scene, the power conflict and all that, they're not talking about the people, but they're talking about the interest of those nations that don't interest the people anymore in a way. And they are just extrapolating on that and putting them, I mean, even more. So they are not preventing the wars. They are participating to make it worse.
So
I think
here,
in the United Nations.
If I can direct the conversation to you, Lorenzo, I think we moved into my questions a little bit, but I think that's fine.
Sorry about that.
It's fine. I think I want to touch on the theme of democracy. I think it's something that is very hot right now. I think many of us think about democracy and how we can make a democratic world. So, Lorenzo, I have a question for you. So in your work, Citizens of Nowhere, you speak about the inherent nature of democracy to reconfigure itself. But today we see that politics has remained static across the world. So in an attempt to recreate a space for reorganization of democracy, we see various forms of extreme resurging. So can you elaborate in your opinion, how do you think we can collectively move beyond this pattern?
Yes, and I think that connects very well with what Raphaël was saying just now. But first, as a parenthesis to conclude our first exchange, the very terminology that we are employing, and I think it's important for us to be aware of it, is a terminology deeply entrenched in a very particular worldview that developed in a very particular context, ancient Greece, and that over the last 3 millennia has come to colonize first the European mind, and then, and hence, the planetary mind. And it is the fracture of that colonization that we're witnessing today. The very term, the very concept of the noumenal is always opposed to the concept of the phenomenal. Yesterday, there was some conversation, of course, avoiding a dualistic division, distinction between the body and the mind. But it's very important, I think, to be aware that that very originary dichotomy was, for instance, absent in classical Chinese philosophy. This is just one example of the term that is at the heart of the title of the conference. Some people use a lot of Greek today. Meta would be another one. That metaphysical space, the space of being as opposed to a space of becoming, is also absent in East Asian thought. And so what I was trying to refer to before, and then I connected to your question politically, is that philosophically, we need to reconstruct a vocabulary, a human vocabulary, that is not entirely and exclusively the product of language's colonization by Parmenides, ultimately, or the Greek mind. And that is a work that I see just beginning to be enacted quite recently, with a resurgence of philosophical interest from a planetary perspective, but is really one that remains to be done. And it's neither comparative philosophy or intercultural philosophy, nor is it a particularistic or civilizational rediscovery of one's own philosophy. This is not Modi's political program of rediscovering Hindu essence, or Xi Jinping's political program of fostering new Confucianism. It's really understanding in between the lines what can emerge
that
as
also you talk about internegrum.
Right, exactly. Anyway, so I think this is important because conferences such as these, in my mind, are really important and unique moments to the extent that they are able to help advance our collective mind out of the primordial Greek cage, out of the primordial Confucian or Indian cage, and onto something that has not yet ever existed, actually, as in terms of planetary categories of thought. But very briefly on your question of how this connects to the politics and to the nation states, and that's the question you posed and where Raphaël was leading us. In this, I have a very simple analysis of the situation. It seems to me that the rise of nationalism that we're witnessing everywhere, ethno-nationalism, whether it is in the United States, in parts of Europe, in India, or in China, is paradoxically, perhaps counterintuitively, certainly contradictorily, the result of the withering out, of the weakening of the nation state as a political form that can guarantee collective agency to communities. It is a little bit like, you know those dogs that are very small and they bark a lot because they feel afraid and weak. I think the nation states today, and this is something that Hannah Arendt actually analyzed in the context of totalitarianism in the 1920s and 30s in Europe, nation states today are undergoing a withering from within, to the extent that, with some possible exception for the United States and China, but only partially, not even totally, there is a lack of capacity of the nation-state form to grab the future and to provide a tangible agency to the citizens of that nation-state over the definition of their common and collective future. And paradoxically, this impotence of the nation-state and the national form produces, as a response, a hardening of the national form in the guise of nationalism and ethnic nationalism.
I think that's a very, thought-provoking, and I think quite connected to the work of Raphael, the grabbing of the future and how basically the also promise of modernity was betrayed. So I want to refer to your work, exactly staying on the same question. You also emphasize the need for putting into question fake versus modern democracy. To you, the solution is not to be found by rethinking the top of the system, but rather by becoming active again. That is, reconnecting with our subjectivity, especially with rehabilitation of the concept of hubris and betting on what you call raw transcendence. This is what you call, and I think that's kind of a direct call on this deep desire to live in a better world. And I want you to elaborate on how can we actively engage people? How would you convince people to bet on their subjectivity, to believe in these ideas?
Oh my God, to convince people, that's a huge task. But there is a German philosopher that I don't remember the name. I tried to remember it. It's not that famous. He's talking about, he's analyzing what is becoming the nation state in itself, and he calls it the negative state. And it's interesting because he's saying, in fact, now the state is just here to provide security in every way, but not to provide our futures. Like when people are scared about something will happen, they will call for the state. They will call like social security, like physical security and all that. And I think one of the interesting situation in which we were, I mean, it was a traumatic situation collectively, but it was interesting. On a political point of view, it is what happened with the COVID-19. Just, I think we were in a state of a trauma because basically the only thing that is provided the nation state now is negativity. He's not providing about the future. His entire function is preventing you from being injured or if something is happening, etc. And it is not here that you don't dream your future with the nation state. You don't dream a future about it. So when he wasn't able, this state, to secure the only thing he was here for, and it wasn't possible to do it, like the entire system showed himself as being like crumbling. And people weren't ready. That nobody wants, like, I'm talking about France, I don't know about elsewhere, but nowadays it's not like in 1914 war where people were going to die. Nobody wants to die for France now in France. I mean, there might be some people, but it's just not possible now to say that we will fight for something positive. It's the reason why I will come to this point that we've lost in politics the positivity. So and positivity is very simple. To come back to exactly to your question, positivity is being active, not being reactive, not being passive. Because when you are passive, you are very dangerous. Passive doesn't mean that you don't do anything. It means that you suffer the situation in which you are. You don't dream about the future.
And so you building a positive
exactly. And so you're becoming violent. People that are passive, they are reactive, they are becoming violent. It's the feeling of impotence that makes you passive. The feeling of impotence is what makes people rape, for instance. So this feeling of impotence, it's what we feel now politically, and it's what is, and the nation state is how can I say, is feeding this feeling of negativity. So that's the reason why it's potentially violent, and there is, in my opinion, those ethno-nationalism that you're referring to, because people are reacting. When you want to find, what is identity? Is to find refuge in a world that you don't understand anymore, you don't like the future, you're unable to project into the future, so you are discontent and all that. And this discontent becomes the value itself. So it's really scary that even the most, what was for the last century, maybe the last 50 years, the most proud, I will say, country of the world, the United States, itself is actually falling into this discontent of itself. So potentially violent, because you are more violent when you are falling into yourself, becoming identitarist, that you are obsessed with your identity, you can't look at the future in the right way. I prefer the United States, like a few years ago, not so long, when they were even in some way, in a naive, like from a French perspective, like in a naive way, like we are so good, we are going to give you democracy and all that. At least there were enthusiasm in that. But now, no, we're not going to give you democracy, you're stealing us, and we are going to refuge into our identity. I think it's much more scary.
So to end this panel on a positive note, I would like to invite both of you to reflect on an idea of utopia. So, Lorenzo, does the Ben Guerir Institute believe in global utopia? If so, does its vision align with the challenges of the global South?
I think this builds up on what Raphaël was saying, because as you know, utopia, a certain dislocation of the place of utopia takes place with the French Revolution, actually. Until then, utopia was simultaneous to our present time, but somewhere else. It was in the seas far away. We had to find a map to look for it and eventually find it. From approximately the French Revolution onwards, so from the full blossoming of Enlightenment thinking onwards, utopia becomes this place, but in the future. So it becomes temporarily asynchronous. It's not something that exists, but elsewhere. It's where we are, but somewhere into the future, which of course brings with it a strong conception of agency. If something exists, but you don't know where it is, the most that you can do is set out for an exploration of the unknown seas in the hope of finding it. That's something maybe closer to Robinson Crusoe, that is the topic of the next panel. But if utopia can be here only into the future, it immediately raises the question of what can I do to march towards that future, to aid history developing in the direction of that future that is promised to me as a possibility. And so we have this emergence of agency as a form of political optimism, of political positivity. So we have the emergence of politics, actually, as something that rallies individuals for good and for bad. It's also the era of mass politics that then leads to totalitarianism. But politics as the self-construction of a community by itself. And it seems to me that today we are losing utopia in that sense, because we're losing a belief in our agency to shape the future. We're not losing a conception of the future. On the contrary, all the conversations today, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth, the future has never been as present as it is today, but somehow the future comes with a feeling of impotence attached to it. There is a future, but you're not going to be the one that actually has much of a say of what future comes your way. Maybe Elon Musk does. Maybe some Altman, maybe some billionaire somewhere, they could have a say in what future comes. But you can only be a passive receiver of what comes into your phone a few months or a few years after the future has been unevenly distributed and unevenly created by a narrower and narrower group of people. So I think that is another component in what Raphaël was saying about this feeling of disenfranchisement, despondency, impotence, this lack of grasp of the tools for creating, for having agency over, for owning ultimately the future. And I conclude by saying, you mentioned utopia. I think the only way that we have to recuperate that sense of agency, and this ties in with where we started our conversation, is to create institutions that can act at a level that is beyond the nation state and that is immediately planetary. The great challenges that we have no control over are challenges that are clearly planetary in scope, whether those are financial, technological, scientific, environmental, of course. or even diplomatic and military questions. But at that level, there is no space where citizens, where individuals can feel they have a role to play that is recognized and is valuable into the management of those challenges and those future challenges. And so we need the construction of planetary institutions. We need, mentioned Castoriadis, an instituent power that creates the spaces within which humanity as a common subject can act for its own future as a common future. And it will not be the nation state nor the United Nations. And theorizing what those institutions will be is, I think, one of the great tasks of political philosophers today, to return where we began from.
Thank you very much. And I know that to wrap up and end this panel, I want to have the final words about, I know that you believe in utopia, but you don't only in a utopia as a general terminology, you believe in a utopia that is concrete, that is not about program, but it's about progress. So can you share a little bit what is a concrete utopia and basically wrap up the panel? Thank you very much.
Let's talk about something that is perceived nowadays as being a problem, like ecology, the future of the planet and all that. People talk about that all the time. And basically, it seems that we know the technical solutions, but we're unable to implement them. Why are we unable to implement them? I think we are unable to implement them because we don't feel it. I mean, there is no desire, what I call, I don't have time here to explain exactly what I call the desire to be, that is directly related to the desire to become, and desire to be greater than what we are, etc., not only to survive, not only to live like comfort, but something else. And this desire to be, it's what drives human beings right from the, have driven human beings right from the start, like in love. It's the desire to be. It's like, I want to be with you. Or what does that even mean? Like, what is this scenario? What is creating this thrill, you know? And so one of the problems, I think, in our society today, to put it in a very micro-political way, it is that we lost track of this desire to be, and so we try to balance it, to compensate it with discourses, even philosophical discourses, ethics. It's my main critiques of someone like Habermas. You could say he's right about everything, except that we don't give a shit about what he writes. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, you read like the thousands of pages where everything is perfect. I also say sometimes the real problem of ethics today, it's actually ethics. Because it's just the fact that you explain technically, it becomes technical. Because first, it has to be aesthetic. When you say in the antiquity, a moral gesture is supposed to be a beautiful gesture. So it's aesthetic. And so you feel good, you feel the desire to be a hero or to be something, etc., etc. And I will finish with saying that who invented sustainable development? The people that actually invented concretely sustainable development, because it was desirable to believe so, it's actually the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s community that were coming to nature, and they were hippies and all these new age things, etc., that we can laugh about, and I do it myself, but in the same time, they invented a way to live in some kind of austerity. But why were they able to live in this kind of austerity? Because they projected with their desire to be more, greater, on another way, like with free love, or I don't know what, you know. They practiced yoga, and they dreamed about something. And this something, allowed them inside themselves to behave in this way without feeling repressed. But now, when you are thinking about ecology, people right away, they feel repressed. They say, oh, I have to do that and not to do that. So they pretend in front of the camera and everywhere, like, of course they will do that, etc. But they don't change their way because they don't have the deep desire to believe this way. So I think one of the mistakes we made, it's in the 50s, like the Club de Rome, the Roma Club, when we started to talk about ungrow. Of course, maybe we need to ungrow on a specific economical point of view, financial point of view, industrial, etc., etc. But we need to propose another way to grow. Because human beings, they were born out of this idea to be greater than their organism, to be greater than they are, so to grow. If you say, there is just ungrow because we need to survive, everybody will tell you, technically you're right, so okay, but they will already feel guilt. And guilt is the opposite of real responsibility. When you feel guilt, you carry on doing the same thing, and you know all those people that say, oh, I feel guilty, and it doesn't, and nothing happens. But when you feel responsible, it's because you are becoming active, you see what is wrong, but you project a real desire to be together.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us. Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, Raphaël.